Today I'd like to take just a few minutes and go over some important elements of the legislation regarding students with special needs. Now, before the Education for All Handicapped Children Act was enacted in 1975, U.S. public schools accommodated only 1 out of 5 children with disabilities. Until that time, many state laws explicitly excluded children with certain types of disabilities from attending public schools, including children who were blind, deaf, and children who were labeled emotionally disturbed or mentally retarded. At the time EHA was enacted in 1975, more than 1 million children in the United States had no access to public school education. Many of these children lived in state institutions where they received limited or no educational or rehabilitation services. Another 3.5 million children attended school but were warehoused. They were segregated from the general population in the school, and they received little or no instruction. As of 2006, more than 6 million children in the United States received special education services through IDEA. Now, in defining the purpose of special education, IDEA in 2004 clarifies Congress's intent for children with disabilities. Students must be provided with a free, appropriate public education. FAPE, a free, appropriate public education that prepares them for further education, employment, or independent living. Now, there are 6 provisions of IDEA. The first is zero reject. What does that mean? That means a child cannot be rejected from a free and appropriate public education. Child Find is an element of IDEA and is designed to carry out the zero reject mandate. Now, the zero reject mandate was taken to court. And in 1989, the courts ruled again that even if students are completely incapable of benefiting from educational services and all efforts are futile, even if a child is unconscious or in a coma, the school is still required to provide educational services to the child. Sounds rather complicated, but it says that the school must constantly try, and the parents must demand and can demand that their child receive some type of educational services. Now, the second provision of IDEA, again, is free and appropriate public education. Now, some of the criteria specified in various sections of IDEA statute includes a requirement that includes schools to provide disabled students with education that is designed to meet their unique needs, provides access to the general curriculum to meet the challenging expectations established for all children, and those students must be provided in accordance with the individual education plan. We call it IEP, and the results must be of educational benefit to the student. Now, the third provision is the least restrictive environment, often referred to as LRE. Now, that allows for different types of placements for students. Schools must justify the need for placements in a particular program outside of the general setting. A child with disability may not be removed from education in age-appropriate regular classrooms just because he or she needs modification to the general curriculum. Again, it's the least restrictive environment. IDEA also requires that the child's placement is determined at least annually, so there must be a review. It is based on the child's IEP. And it must also be as close as possible to the child's home. Now, there are several types of placements when you're talking about decisions regarding placement in a school. These options include placements such as the general education class, a special education class, a special education school, at home or in a hospital, or in other public or private institutions. Again, the placement issue is one that is challenged consistently. People wanting to make sure that their children are getting the best that they can. Now, the fourth provision of IDEA is the non-discriminatory testing. This provision looks at all assessments for students. The assessments must be in a child's native language and they must be fair. Sounds simplistic, but many jurisdictions have a great deal of difficulty with that. The interpretation of the assessments must be done by individuals with the appropriate knowledge and training. So you simply can't just take an English teacher or a math teacher and say, look at these results, tell me what you think. No, the person must be trained in looking at that particular instrument. Now, the fifth element of IDEA, or the fifth provision, is confidentiality. Information about a child cannot be shared with anyone else unless they are directly involved in the child's educational program. A school must keep records of those individuals who review a child's records. And the parents have a right to see all information in a child's file. A lot of schools don't like that. So they make sure that things are not recorded. But any note that anyone in attendance at those meetings or having a role in the child's education, any note, even if it's just on a little piece of paper, even on a napkin that's tucked away, if you wrote it down and you kept it, it must become a part of the child's file. And the sixth and final major provision of IDEA is due process. Procedural safeguards must be put in place by the school. Parents must be notified of any changes in a child's IEP and allowed to provide input on the proposed changes. It is important that schools review the state's particular interpretation of the IDEA guidelines. Each individual state can make some variations. It's important that you look at the website for your particular state to see what their requirements and how they're interpreting the law. Just because it's there also does not mean that it's always legal. Sometimes things are put in and they are challenged by the courts. Oftentimes, the states are required to change those regulations that they have put in place. Again, 6 major provisions of IDEA: zero reject, free and appropriate public education, least restrictive environment, non-discriminatory testing, confidentiality, and due process. Those are the major concepts and provisions of IDEA. We'll talk more as we go through the semester about the implementation of those in our private schools. Hope this information helps.